Hello, everyone. To the Mastering MuseScore School here. Welcome to the Music Masterclass. So I'm thinking today, I really just want to look at some of your music. I don't have anything in particular prepared to show you of my own. I want to just look at your music because people are really starting to submit some things. I want to remind people that we're still in April, kind of looking at doing songs about spring, and so I've got a couple of those we're going to look at. I've been talking a lot about counterpoint, and so I want to look at this fugue that I keep talking about. It's such a wonderful fugue, a whole series of them by Vasily, but I'm going to look at one of them in particular today. So, welcome everyone that's here, and thanks for checking in. Feel free to continue to do so. And I'm making sure that I'm working on my phone. I'm not seeing anything right now, so I do want to make sure that I'm correctly broadcasting. Am I here? Is the question. Am I actually here? I think I am. All right, I'm going to say that I am, and it's just a bigger delay than usual. So, again, welcome everyone, and let me just say hi to people here in the chat. So I see people from all over the place, which is great, fantastic. Yeah, I'm just going to launch right into some things here. So I'm going to start looking at one of the spring songs from Gijs, who put in this piece. It's an instrumental, which is fine. It can be about spring and still be instrumental, right? So you have it inspired in whatever way. By the way, notice I've got this a little highlight going on my cursor here. I was in the middle of recording some other tutorial videos, and it enabled this. Let me know if you end up finding that useful or distracting today. For the tutorials, I think it's useful. For this, I'm not so sure, but you all can let me know. So let's just first listen. All right, beautiful job, Gijs. I really enjoy this piece a lot. I was actually making some mental notes as I was listening of spots I want to go back to and check out what's going on. So I'm going to do that in a second. So I did turn up the volume, and hopefully that got better. I had turned down the volume when I first start so that the theme music doesn't drown out my playing. So hopefully once I turned it up, that was better. So this piece as far as I can tell, was written for piano, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. If you actually had a choral setting in mind, that would be good to know. I would point out that this is written in an SATB type of style, right? I mean, at all times, we're dealing with four voices. So this could have been conceived of for a choir, but it completely works as piano music, and that's a common way of writing piano music. You start by thinking SATB, you kind of get your stuff together, and then you can think about whether you want a different texture. But sometimes just sticking with a very uh, straightforward SATB as if you were writing for choir. S, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, if you're not familiar with those acronyms or abbreviations. The soprano voice, the alto voice, the tenor voice, and the bass voice. They kind of continue throughout the piece. So there's a couple spots in particular I'm actually really interested to go look at because they were really beautiful. One of them was measure 36. And I'm pretty sure I know what's going on, but I want to hear it again because it was so nice. So I'll start around here. I think actually it was before measure 36 was the actual spot. Yeah, because actually, okay, so the number that's showing here under position is different. I guess, what is that? I don't even know what it is, but it's different than the measure numbers that I'm seeing here. So I was going by what I saw on position in the play panel. So I'm going to start it earlier because apparently right there. That's the spot that I was really interested in. And what it is, I don't know what it is. It's a sound. Let's listen to this sound. So the sound that I'm hearing, and yes, I'm going to bet that there are parallel fifths to be found in many places here. And I'm going to make the observation that I make in many contexts, which is that parallel fifths are not evil in themselves. It's a style thing. Whereas if you're trying to convey a certain type of sound, a certain type of harmonic sound that was typical of the 17th and 18th centuries, you avoid them. Um, if you're going for a different sound, then the parallel fifths aren't in themselves a problem. That's not to say that we don't want to be aware of their existence. So I'll be curious which one you were looking at. I mean, I can definitely see that there's a fifth at the beginning of this measure and a fifth at the beginning of this measure, but they're interrupted by another note. In any case, what's happening here is the 4 chord. So if we think of this as in the key of C, which we're not really, we're more in the key of A minor here, but for this passage, I feel like we can think of this passage as in the key of C major. So I have a 1 chord and then a 4 chord in first inversion. So A is in the bass. And then this sound right here, it's hard to put a label on that as a sound. I mean, in the sense of if you take it really literally, you can look at this E, G, B, D, and say, oh, that's E minor 7. That's the 3 chord in first inversion. Maybe that's how our brain interprets it, but I won't swear to it. It's possible that our brain is really hearing a 5 chord here, and it's hearing that E as a non-chord tone. That is entirely possible. When we're dealing with music that's, I guess, largely diatonic, because this is largely diatonic music, and that's specific, right? Heist, you said in the notes that you were specifically a series of pieces in different modes, I think you said, and so this technically is Aeolian mode as far as being the diatonic, meaning all the kind of white keys, all sticking within a key, no accidentals, with A as kind of your tonic as far as that goes. The final note is A. There's passages within it that feel like they're in other keys. So when you're writing essentially diatonic music, it's possible to create all sorts of textures that are not literally any particular chord. And we can still perceive this as beautiful, even when the texture doesn't necessarily add up to a chord. So I'm actually going to flip to another piece here. This is one, that's really, really interesting. And I'm just going to play you the beginning of this, not even the very beginning, but it's a standard called Skylark that is arranged using counterpoint in an extremely literal way. In other words, it's a canon. We're going to play the melody, Skylark, have you anything to say to me? And then the next voice comes in with the exact same melody a measure later. And harmonically, we're not going to be able to look at this in terms of chords. And there's a lot of dissonant intervals that we're going to look at and go, wow, if I was thinking about it in those terms, this would be an issue. But it's not. This is a thing that I often turn to Aaron Copland as my example of. And again, one day I should come up with a good example of what I really mean by that. How Aaron Copland would write these textures that the voice leading makes everything work and it stays within a key, so our ear doesn't perceive it as atonal. We're hearing a key center, and yet the intervals themselves can be sort of arbitrarily dissonant sometimes. So listen to this piece. Now I'm going to stop there because after that he goes into much more traditional. Well, I'll play a minute, just a few seconds of this. We'll come back to it though. So that is a much more traditional harmonization of it. It's using the actual chords that if you know the piece, these are pretty much, the standard types of chords that we would hear. We have an E flat major chord, and it's one chords, four chords, five chords. You can see anytime you see an accidental, in something other than just the middle of a scale, you should be thinking, oh, that probably is telling me there's a non-diatonic chord, a chord not in the key, and chances are really good it's a secondary dominant, because those are our most important chords that are not in the key. As soon as I see a flat that's not in the key, my brain, without knowing anything else, says, what I know about secondary dominants is most of them involve sharps. They involve raising scale degrees. So if you're trying to tonicize the 5 chord, you use a major 2 chord or a dominant 7/2 chord, and that's going to involve a raised scale degree. So in the key of E flat, for instance, if I'm trying to tonicize the 5 chord, B flat, I'm going to give it an F major chord, which requires an A natural. So that's the 5 of 5, which is one of our really common secondary dominants. And we get that right here. So we have our 5 of 5 to 5 to 1. So as soon as I see the accidentals, my brain can fairly quickly go to tell me what it is that I'm hearing. When I saw that A natural, I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to be a 5 of 5. That's the F chord going to B flat, going to E flat, circle of fifths. This, when I see a flat, the only secondary dominant that typically involves a flat is 5 of 4. In other words, if I'm trying to tonicize the 4 chord, an A flat chord, if I want to tonicize that, then I create an E flat 7, a 1 dominant 7th. So I want to ask, by the way, it's still quiet. Okay, that's so weird that it is quiet. Let me, um, oh, I think that's just because the dynamic markings on the piece themselves are quiet. I'm going to go with that. So what I'm going to do here is delete all dynamic markings. That is my little trick that I should remember to do. Um, there you go. So yeah, that is the thing. I want to be in the habit of remembering to do that. If I'm gonna, I mean, I don't want to delete all dynamic markings if I'm just playing the piece full on because we want the dynamics. But if I'm trying to demonstrate things and isolate passages, let's hear them full volume. So thanks for letting me know, and I will try to remember that. I see a comment about Ray Vaughan Williams, and yes, it actually was. That is one of the comments that Gijs made in the actual let's see if I go to the sheet music here and actually go to where his score is, and you can see his comments right here. He makes some comments about the origin of the piece. I thought he did. Was it not here? Maybe it was. Oh yeah, right here. No, but somewhere there was mention about Vaughan Williams. So was it in the discussion? It could have been in the discussion. In any case, yes, there was a deliberate reference for sure. And I'll be danged if I know where I saw that, because I know I saw that. Couldn't tell you right now. So it's in there. It's in there somewhere. I know that much. That's all I know. It's actually at the top of the score, but oh no, that's the Skylark one. So I'm totally mixing two things up in my head. So totally mixing two things up in my head. Sorry about that. All right. So what I was really going to talk about with Skylark was, so once we got to that second phrase, then we have the full chords with all the secondary dominants and triads and things. But at the beginning, all we have is the counterpoint going on. Now, as we're doing this, we have these dissonances, which it resolves, right? The melody moves by step. It's a dissonance from the C to the D, and it resolves by step. And that's great, but I would say in this, it's not necessarily going to be careful to do that all the time, and it's going to be okay. Like here, this F comes in against that G, which is dissonant, and then leaps to a C. You're not supposed to whatever. If you're following all the traditional counterpoint rules, you don't typically leap out of a dissonance. And here he is leaping out of that to the C, which is itself technically a dissonance against the G. It's a fourth. Perfect fourths are considered dissonant in this sort of two-voice counterpoint. But my point is, this doesn't matter. Within this texture, this sort of diatonic voice leading led. It's not harmony led, it's voice leading led. It's led by the voice leading as opposed to anything else. And when you do that and you keep things diatonic, it's very easy for the ear to accept a lot of things that it wouldn't otherwise accept. It's when we start actually building chords that we notice non-chord tones and they start standing out more. Or if you start introducing chromaticism here, it starts to feel more atonal. And of course, he had no choice about, I say he, I actually don't know if it's, I don't know the first name of this person, sorry, GLA, and it was GL Archer. But in any case, this isn't that person's melody, right? It's Hoagie Carmichael's melody. So there wasn't a lot of choice about the choice of the intervals here, but there was choice about how to arrange this counterpoint and whether to make it come in at a different level, not coming in with the same pitch. Also, whether to bring it in one measure later or two measures later. One of the things that happened by bringing it in only one measure later is there's a lot of overlap, right? So we're going to hear the C with another C, right? Now we get a G with another G, and that happens over and over again. We still hear one note from the first voice when the second note comes in. So that's going to happen a lot in this piece because it's got a bunch of long notes. So if we didn't want that effect, one thing to have experimented with would have been what happens if we actually displace this a little more. So I'm going to I just want to see. I'm going to cut this thing and paste it right here and just see what happens. All right. When I did that, I got something that works in a traditional way. So it's still quiet, you guys are saying. So, all right, I'm just going to go ahead and turn up the master volume, and we'll remember to turn it down later. All right. So that feels like it's going to be really loud. So what I hear through my headphones is different from what you're hearing on your computers. So it's hard for me to know. So here, from C to G, it's technically the G is above, the C is above the G. It's a perfect fourth there. Because they're two different instrument sounds, and I'd say that perfect fourth traditionally in this sense is considered dissonant. There's a sense in which I actually don't care, and so I'm going to go with that sense, but I want to pay attention to this. I almost couldn't have done better with that had I planned it. I didn't plan this, right? I just randomly copied and pasted a thing. But the melody itself had that sequence of eighth notes that's then echoed by another sequence of eighth notes. And when you put it in the counterpoint with itself, you have, if I actually take this down an octave, it might be a little more easier for me to understand what's happening. But in any case, now I can see it's a perfect fifth. So when I do this, it's perfect fifths everywhere. Perfect fifth there instead of a fourth. And then E flat to G is a sixth. D to B flat is a sixth. C to G is a fifth. B flat to E flat is a fourth, which is technically our dissonance, but it's resolving by step. A flat to C, and then it ends up on this lovely sixth between G and E flat. So I actually, by making that change, I lost that character we started with, where we had these interesting dissonances, and now it sounds too ordinary for my taste. So I'm also curious to see what would have happened if I had selected that passage, but instead of moving it a whole measure over, had just moved it a couple beats over. I want to hear that now. So when I did that, it had an interesting effect to me, because now it still feels quite random in terms of how the intervals are lining up, but I have much less of that places where both voices line up on the same note, and that is just because of the melody. It's not because that always happens when you do this. But if you have your interval of imitation, in other words, where you start, how many beats over, if you do that with too short of a time interval, then you're going to have a lot of those places where one note is still sounding and then the next voice comes in and we're going to hear the same note twice. So the further over you move it, the less of the chance that happens. When it does happen prominently, it happens in an interesting way here. Right? It kind of comes to a period there. And that's actually quite appropriate because it actually feels to me, I've always felt like this piece feels like the A section is too long, right? I mean, it's not too long, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 measures, and then into the seventh measure there, it feels like it could have ended there. Is there a meadow in the mist? And then this part where someone's waiting to be kissed. I mean, it just needs to be there to finish out the line of, the actual lyric. But it always feels a little bit like an afterthought, melodically, harmonically, because usually this would be a turnaround. This would be just an instrumental interlude in a lot of other pieces. It would be the downbeat of measure 7. That would be the end of the phrase. So this has always struck me as a little curious, but then it ends up that we get that lining up there. So in any case, this thing that I'm doing of playing with different intervals to start things, and you can also play with not just the time interval, but the pitch interval that you want to start with. So if I decide, you know what, I really didn't want that thing to end up with 2 E flats, then I'm just going to go down diatonically a couple of steps and see how I like that. All right, so this was not an improvement, right? Because I ended up with that real dissonance there between the A flat and the G. Right, that's pretty darn dissonant. And then I ended up with this unison over here. So if you're trying to put a piece in canon with itself like that, um, realistically, I do a lot of this trial and error thing. I will literally take this piece and then start the canon and figure out where I can put it. Normally, I don't write a canon that way. I don't write the whole melody and then now where can I start the next voice? I write a little bit and then start the next voice and then kind of zigzag my way through. And that way you can make it work. I guess I should demonstrate that. Maybe I'll demonstrate that next time. But I'll write like 2 measures and then copy down here and then write some harmony for it. Copy it down here, write some harmony for it. Copy it down here, write some harmony. So you can be guaranteed of getting good results if you do that. On the other hand, you should be not just thinking of this as harmony for it. It should be its own thing. And so you have to do some amount of thinking ahead also. And so this is what makes real counterpoint writing such an art, to be able to do it well. But when you're doing this sort of thing where you're going to know that you're going to accept certain dissonances and things, you can totally do things like what I'm doing of just trying different time intervals, trying different pitch intervals for your imitation to see how things line up and how well you like it. So that was a nice diversion into that. I started, though, with Gijs's piece, just to point out that there's a lot of places where there are similar kind of dissonances and things that feel like they're what I would call voice leading led. In fact, right off the bat, at the very beginning, we get some of it fairly early on. Let me start it again. I guess it's further than I thought. Okay, right here. This, if you take that in isolation, you go, well, what is that doing there? Those are 2 pretty harsh dissonances. B to C, that's a minor ninth. Okay, technically it's a minor, what's 9 plus 7? 16th. It's a minor 16th. Whatever, it's a dissonant interval. This interval made 7th no better. And then we end up with this other curious thing here of, it's not parallel octaves, but they're offset, right? We have C to C, and then B to B. And it's like a little follow the leader parallel octaves thing. And the thing is, again, in this world where we're really thinking more modally, someone mentioned about Renaissance music, and I think you were talking about this piece and not Skylark, although now I've actually forgotten which was which. Since the whole goal of this was to compose a piece modally, using modes, not thinking about chords and harmony so much, although clearly it is. I'm going to come back to that point in a second. Using in that type of thing, it's based more on how the intervals work out and how the voice leading works out, and you can have dissonances, and if they resolve and you come to a nice consonant sound there, it can work. And so to me, had I been thinking harmonically there, I might not have put this little line in the bass. I might have said, hey, I'm trying to get from G to F. And maybe this eighth note line would not have been what I would have chosen to help me make that bridge, because it's creating these dissonances that I don't need. But if I'm thinking purely about the voice leading, then yes, it's okay to do that. It's totally okay to have dissonances that don't resolve in really traditional ways if your goal isn't to have really traditional harmonies. And so it's worth knowing. There's a saying that I don't really like. It's got some truth to it, but I think it's often sort of misstated or misunderstood as far as what it might really mean. And it's something to the effect of you have to learn the rules in order to break them. And I think it's usually attributed to Charles Ives, who is someone else who definitely would be speaking this language. And I can agree with what I think the intent was there, but I think the meaning is often lost, or at least what I think of as the meaning being. It's not that I don't even know how to put into words what I want to say here. Rules can't be broken, is what I would say. You can't break rules. There is no rule that says don't have parallel fifths. That is wrong. There is no such rule. What the rule says is if you write parallel fifths, you will create this sound. And then you get to decide if that's the sound you want. So you don't learn the rule in order to break it. You learn the rule in order to take advantage of it properly. Therefore, if I write parallel fifths, this is the sound I get. If I don't resolve this dissonance in the traditional way, this is the sound I get. Then you don't break that rule. There is no breaking that rule. If X, then Y. You can't break that. If X, then Y. This is going to be true. But what you can do is say, do I want Y or not? If I want Y, I'm going to do X. If I don't want Y, then I'm not going to do X. So, that's how I think of it. Don't even think about breaking rules. It's impossible. Rules are not things that tell you what you must do. They are things that tell you what the effect of doing certain things are. So I want you to always have that type of mindset in your head. So there was a comment about a B flat. If you're talking about these Bs here, that would be sort of interesting, because that would totally take it. I'm going to do that because I think it's a great example. Let's listen to this passage as written. Now, I don't know if this is exactly what you meant, but I look at this and I say, hey, here's a G chord. And I look here and say, hey, there's an F chord. Now, what I know about traditional harmony, which is, post-Renaissance kinds of things, is if I want to get from G to F, that is what we would call sometimes a regressive progression, or a regression. Usually we move from 4 to 5 and then 1 in the key of C. And even in the key of A minor, it's still going to be the same case where these two major chords tend to ascend, not descend. So what I would be looking at instead is a circle of fifths. Instead of going from G to F, I would want to create a C chord. So to some extent, I have a C chord here. I have those Cs. Well, what if I actually change this note to be a C? And since I don't really want that doubled C anymore, I'm going to change this. And then maybe I'm just going to keep this as a quarter note for now. Where was it? Sorry. When I changed it to a quarter note, it changed where my line break fell, so I lost my place. There we go. And I could further enhance that sense by changing this D into a half note and then putting a quarter note E here. And now I have harmony. then I would have to ask myself, is that really the voice leading I want? But it's actually not too bad. I could probably improve the voicing of that last chord some. In fact, if I, instead of putting a C here, let me just put an F there, because now I'm trying to think harmonically instead of just voice leading. So now it's G to C to F. Now it's telling a harmonic story that maybe wasn't meant to be told. Then, when I saw the comment about B flat, this is where going back to this now. Now I've added this B flat. I've created a secondary dominant, 5 of 4. Again, I'm using C major terminology because it's convenient. In the key of C, F would be our 4 chord, C would be our 5 chord. So this would be 5 of 4. So now I've taken what was a lovely modal thing involving nice sounding intervals and good voice leading, hopefully, and I've turned it into something that's much more traditionally a chord progression, using more traditional, tonal types of thinking. I didn't improve it, I changed it. And so, again, if you think, oh, circle of fifths, if you should move chords in a circle of fifths. Well, you should if that's the sound you want. But if that's not the sound you want, then don't do it. And here, it's, to me, not an improvement in the slightest. I mean, it's nice. It's a perfectly nice sound. But it is, to me, not the slightest bit of improvement over where he started. Where it was fine. It was great for what it was trying to achieve. So, yeah, and there were all sorts of places in here where I heard kind of similar kinds of things going on that I thought really worked well for what they were. Now, there's certainly places where the voice leading could possibly be improved within the context of what maybe he was actually going for. Like this measure here, just to look at it, looks awkward. And when I say to look at it, I see what's a tritone here, and then both voices leaping down into this perfect fifth. To look at it, it doesn't look good. It looks like it's too leapy, and so two voices leaping together into a perfect fifth, and one of them has leapt below where the other one was. There's a voice crossing kind of term that is used for this. The bass was on the F, and then on the next beat, the tenor leaps below where the bass just was. That's how big of a leap this was. But also the fact that it was a leap of a fifth, also the fact that it was a leap from a tritone. Looking at it, all of those things look like potential issues. When I look at it harmonically, I see, hey, look, here's what looks like a G7 chord resolving to an A minor chord. So basically 5 resolving to 6 in major, or 7, or flat 7 as I like to call it, resolving to 1 in A minor. But let me actually hear it. So when I hear it, on the piano, I'm less aware of these leaps because I hear the F to E, I hear that sound. So I hear the F to E leap, and it kind of makes me want to change this around a little bit. What if I basically switch these two voices? In other words, I'm going to make the lower voice be the B to A, and I'm going to make the upper voice be the F to the E. Now I'm going to have a tritone going to a fifth, and yeah, that's something we talked about last time. Potentially an issue, but I think I'm going to like this actually better. So voice leading wise, now no one is leaping. I still have the same motions, but now the F to the E is in the same voice. On the piano, you can't tell which voice is which because it sounds like the same F going to the same E. But with human voices or instruments, I would be able to tell that it was a different instrument that played the F versus the one that played the E, or a different person singing the F versus the one singing the E. So I'd be more inclined to go with it this way. Now, if I was uncomfortable with that tritone resolving that way, well, I would sacrifice the tritone, sacrifice the seventh and make it be a root. When I do that, I actually have parallel fifths here. Yes, I'm aware of that. So I would also look at this chord here and say, you know what? I really didn't need to double that A. So I'm going to make this be an F instead. Second inversion triads, typically we double the root. So actually, I could make that happen too, right? Not the root, the bass note. So I could do this. So I think in doing that, I maybe have improved it without destroying the original character like I did over on that other place. I feel like this held on to what I wanted to hold on to. But, really that second inversion chord with the fifth doubled like that isn't doing it for me. Even though that's the traditional doubling, again, we're not trying to say a traditional harmonic story. I think maybe I'm going to be happier with it this way. Am I? I don't know if I am. But in any case, those are the questions I want to ask myself. Did I try taking this one up to a C? Oh, parallel octaves. No, I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to play it anyhow. No, definitely not. Let me try keeping the A like he had it. Oh, but when I kept the A, I had the parallel octaves of A to A, G to G. So I wasn't crazy about that either. So yeah, I think I'll go with the F probably as my favorite. Yeah, that's probably my favorite of the options that I've given myself. So, what is the point of the rule? So Dave, I think the way you've described it is as succinct of an explanation as I could ever give. Certainly, if you have parallel octaves, we hear an octave as the same pitch, right? If I write this, we hear as essentially one voice. We barely are aware of the separate pitches. So octaves have that effect on us aurally because the overtone, that is the first overtones here. So if you know anything about the physics of vibrating strings and how sound is produced, every vibration produces overtones that are like vibrations at a higher frequency that happen at the same time. This C has that C within it. This C is vibrating and has a little bit of that C within it. But it also has this within it. So let me go to voice 2 and enter C, D, E. It has within it, basically, the next overtone is this. So when you hear this low C, you are technically also hearing this line. These pitches are built into the overtones of this. And so at some level, our ear is less aware of that G, A, and the B than it would be if it was any other pitch. The octave and the fifth are the ones that our ears are most likely to confuse. Now, modern ears aren't really going to confuse that fifth. Unless you're playing an organ. I have to say most organs have overtones on at least some of their stops so that you hear a very clear fifth in there. And there are certain other instruments that can do that. Like I think timpanis can be produced in a way where you can hear a very strong fifth overtone, the perfect fifth, which is the second overtone. But in any case, by any time you have a fifth, there's a sense in which our ears can merge them together a little bit. And so when you move them together, it's as if we're not really hearing two voices. This passage, it's really easy to say, well, I only heard one thing. Here, I'm more clearly hearing two things, but still that's in there a little bit. There's also a harshness to it that comes from the fact that I do hear two voices, but I'm not hearing a chord. In the Renaissance, they wouldn't have been aware of the sense of a chord. They wouldn't have been aware of what was missing, the third being missing from this chord. But I am aware of it. Modern ears are aware of that missing third. I think Renaissance ears were aware of it. They just didn't have a term for it. So good. So I'm glad that people are liking the red circle. So talk about that. So also, one of the points that I was going to mention is that even if you're not aware of chords, there's no getting around the fact that if you want to have three notes at the same time with no dissonances, that's your way to do it. This combination of notes, a third apart, is the only way to have notes. Now, you can change their octaves around, but as soon as you try to introduce any other intervals into this equation of three notes, you're going to introduce some dissonances. Like if I think I'm going to be all clever and change that G to a B, well, now I've got a perfect fifth between the E and the B, but C to B is a seventh. I'm going to have a seventh. If I make it an A, okay, yeah, that's fine, but this is really just an octave rearrangement of a plain triad. So what I'm saying is, if you're trying to create consonants, triads are the only way to do it. So I want to spend a couple minutes looking at Bruce's piece, and then I'm going to look at Vasili's fugue. So Bruce's piece here is really it's just this really well conceived kind of pop song kind of piece. So I'm just going to play some for you. Actually, I'm going to turn off the repeats. And that's basically the end, because then it repeats, but the next time it's gonna end that way. So sorry, I'm turning off repeats just in the interest of time. So yeah, it's a really nice song. I mean, I like the melody a lot, and I love what the things that are going on harmonically, since I'm talking about harmony a lot today. I mean, we're starting off with this sort of 2-5-1 into G, and we think, okay, we're in the key of G major. And then, you know, this is a little tonus, a little 2-5, and you think maybe at that point we're going to E minor, but we don't. We go to A minor, which is an interesting choice. It's a deceptive resolution, basically. And then another deceptive resolution. This time the B is going to C. And now we come to a B that feels like a tonic, right? Because now he's tonicized the B. He's taken that chord that was a non-diatonic chord itself, the B chord, that he had never resolved it in a traditional way. None of those B chords go to E. Even the B minor chord doesn't go to an E chord. The B7 doesn't go to an E. It goes to A minor, and then it goes to C, and then it goes to A minor again. And then here's a B7 that we think is maybe going to resolve, but instead he takes a step back on the circle of fifths, gives it a 5 chord, comes back to the B as a major 7th chord. So he's really having fun with that B. Whether or not that's how you're consciously thinking of it, that is the impression I get. So that when this resolution to B happens there, I'm really happy with it and thinking, wow, that's really interesting and satisfying to me. The B never resolved, but then the B becomes its own resolution. It's possible to overthink this kind of stuff, but it's also, I don't know, useful to have this sort of awareness of what might be going on to cause us to like something. You can just write something and say, oh, I like it, I don't like it. But often I make this point, what causes you to like something is usually something that we could put words to if we understood it. But also, you might play something, go, oh, I kind of like that. But what could be the case is that it wasn't quite what you meant. That what you meant was something a little different, and you played something that was close enough to it to fool your ear into saying, oh, I kind of like that. And then you give up looking for the thing that you were really going for. So by knowing what it is that's going on, that gives you an opportunity to say, now, wait a minute, is that what I was really going for? As an example, this progression here, this B7 going to A minor, I call that a deceptive resolution. This is not one you see every day. The deceptive resolutions that I would expect from B7, if I think of F sharp minor to B7 as coming from the key of E, so B7 goes to E normally. One deceptive resolution then would be, instead of going to 1, to go to 6. Well, that would have been a C sharp minor chord. And it's not going to work with the melody, but I'm going to put a C sharp minor chord in it. It doesn't work at all, and I've got the wrong bass note in there. But anyhow, that would have been a 5 to 6, a traditional deceptive resolution. In a minor key, then if it was E minor, resolution to the flat 6 chord would have been a very traditional deceptive resolution. And that's the deceptive resolution he gives me next, B to C. Right? He gives me that resolution next. So this version here of putting an A minor in there, that's like, let me undo that change. This is like the minor 4 chord in the key of E, but it has a lot of the same notes as that C chord. And you know how much I love that minor 4 chord. I'm not going to belabor that right now. But he does use that later, and so I'm going to come back to it in a second. So we have the sound, the feel of B7 going to C, but instead of playing a C, he puts an A in the bass below it. So it's that same deceptive resolution as far as the rest of the voice leading goes, but the bass note is resolving differently. So to me, there's just a lot of really interesting treatment around that B that to me makes things really interesting. Then at this point, now we're going to have 4, 5, 1 to A minor. And A minor is at this point kind of feeling like our key, because now we're in A minor. 5, 4, 5, 1, 5. And from this point, he starts a circle of fifths progression to get us to C. Right? E, well, sort of a circle of fifths. This E7 should have gone to A and then back to C to D, but it didn't fit with his melody, so he just chose to ignore the A. So from D to G to C, yeah, if he had felt like trying to throw an A minor in there, I'm going to throw one in there just to see. In fact, what if we just left out the E7? I'm actually curious about that. That would have been a possibility. The bass note, of course, changed there, but if I change that, now it's a very straightforward circle of fifths progression, A minor to D7. I didn't mind the E in there, but I wanted to sort of understand what's going on, and if there felt like a need for the E, if it was adding something or not. Once you hear it both ways, then you can decide for yourself. But once he reaches the C, F, C, and then F minor to C minor. Now he's using this minor 4 chord not to borrow it and come back to C, but to actually modulate to C minor. And then we're in C minor the rest of the way out. And it's 1, 4s, and 5s in C minor. And then he modulates back to the original key. With the repeat there, it would have gone back to the original key. So he's got this A flat, which is, it's in the key of C minor. Now, 2, 5, 2, 1 in G, which is kind of where he started again. So it's a really interesting mix of how the keys work together, how these modulations happen. We go from G to kind of this B kind of tonality, and then we come into more of an A minor tonality, live there for a little while, resolve to C major, and then go to C minor and live there for a little while. And yet, it all seems like it makes sense, and especially when we pay attention to the melody feels like it's taking all of this in stride. I mean, if you look at the melody, it's mostly manages to be diatonic here. There's very few accidentals required in the melody other than these like points of to get that B major chord in there. And when he hits even through here, right, there's still totally diatonic. It's really only when he hits the C minor section that we start needing the A flats and the E flats that are needed to say, hey, we're in C minor. So that's actually very small modifications, and yet he keeps the same motifs going throughout it, and that helps tie it together through all these key changes. So I find that really interesting. Okay, so and minor corresponds to the meaning of the words, and of course, I'm focusing so much on what I'm focusing on, I'm only barely aware of the lyrics here, and that's because I'm jumping in where I'm jumping. Of course, if I was looking at the words, then this would probably make a lot of sense. And as soon as I see the word "and yet," going to minor immediately starts to make sense, because it's like, oh, here comes the not so, here comes the bad part, or here comes the twist or whatever. And so the key changes totally feel like they probably are telling a story there. So yeah. So to me, that was the interesting thing here, how this melody holds together through all these interesting key changes, and the rhythms hold the piece together, and it all just really works well. So I'm going to come back because Bruce also had written that really large scale piece that had that like the school song sections, and I'm going to come back to the sections of that piece in another lesson. But before I go, I do want to start talking about Wassely's fugue. It's huge. This is a long fugue. And very involved. It has a lot. I mean, it's not super long. It's well, it's pretty darn long actually as fugues go. It's like it's over 3 minutes, which isn't ridiculously long. But what I'm going to do is play it for you, and just I want to start just by talking about the subject and play you the whole thing, and then we're going to come back and talk about it more next time, because it's really deserves to be looked at in more detail. But our basic subject is this. So that is the subject for the fugue. That is the theme we're going to hear over and over again. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do is, I know that Wassely was using different fonts for the text and different sound fonts. In the default sound font, accent marks are ridiculously overly harsh for piano. So I'm going to select all those accent marks and just turn them off for playback. So first of all, this subject, well, too bad we lost our staccato too. I should have been. Actually, I'm going to show you how to do this. I'm going to So did I undo it? Good. All right. I'm going to right-click that accent, but instead of all similar, I'm going to go to more and say same subtype. So now it only applies to accent staccatos. If there's any plain accents, they're going to stand out, but we'll live with that. Oh, I forgot to turn them off. I went through the trouble of selecting them and then forgot to turn them off. So one more try. More, same subtype. Okay, turn off playback. All right. And here comes the third voice. And then there's all sorts of other things that are happening in this fugue that, it's a fugue that does just really, really wonderful things throughout. I'm going to play you the whole thing in a minute and just sort of close out with the whole fugue because it goes to amazing, amazing places. I think. I mean, I think just also you've got just an amazing facility with this style and the ability to just like have these things come out that just make perfect sense as it makes complex things seem almost effortless. So that is the subject here, and this is like to me like a really strong thing. It starts off with this really bum bum bum, right? It starts off with just a prominent series of quarter notes, and then this repeated note with that descending leap down. This is a really distinctive melody. And that leap down, I had mentioned it was a Mozart piece that it reminded me of, and Vasily told me one that he thought it was similar to, um, part of the Requiem, I think. But in any case, then it's got its own little answering phrase, right? It's got and then a little answering. That sort of thing, when you have two similar phrases within the subject of your fugue, it's going to introduce interesting possibilities for like uh, stretto when you have like part of the subject and then the next part of the subject overlaps it. It means one voice will be playing this part of the melody while another one is playing that part of the melody, and then they can be in kind of parallel, right? Because then this might be happening down here, but maybe it'll be a step higher. So you'll be able to have things like that happening in the fugue without having to try especially hard. And then he's got a third one. So that gives you that many more possibilities for it. And then this whole other little figure. So the subject itself is big. It's got a lot of stuff going on in it, any one of which could give you a lot of great opportunities for development. And I think that's why this fugue has as much going on, because he's got so much to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you this thing out so you can hear it, and we're going to take it apart a little bit more in little bits. So between this and Bruce's piece is much longer than this. This is dense, and so in 3 minutes there's an awful lot going on. So I'm going to play this and take my lead. But I think you guys are really going to love this piece. I hope you do. It's just it's great. Bravo, bravo. So, yeah, there's just so much to talk about in this thing. And what's interesting to me is that it really does develop into different sections um, that develop very naturally from one part to the next, where there's like, there's like this little section where he's like, oh, let me get into these 16th note triplets. And he plays with that idea for a while, and then it's like, oh, but there's these other sections when I mentioned Mozart, right? There's the Mozartian kind of this little business here, right? That feels very, or even the Alberti bass going on here, right? And so it feels like there's like different sections because that part feels Mozart-like, and then there's this other part that feels much more Beethoven-esque. These big, heavy chords and things going on, and kind of dissonant harmonies happening within it. Right, and so yeah, there's each section has its own little things being worked out that I think are just really just marvelous. So those were some of the things that I wanted to be talking about today, and I look forward to seeing other music that people start producing over the coming week. Again, it's still spring, it's still April. I'd still love to see any songs that people want to submit about spring for us to look at, but whatever, right? Whatever, we'll take a look at it. Boy, now that's loud. Ah, there we go. Okay, so thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for staying with me on this journey, looking at all this different music we've looked at. I had a great time. I always enjoy hearing what you guys are making and hearing the music and helping us see what makes it work, look to see what other choices we could possibly be making along the way and how we can all learn from each other. If you haven't already done so, be sure you enroll in it using the link at the top of the chat there so that you get notifications. By the way, check out my online courses and stuff. And we do this every Thursday. So I hope to see you again next week.